Okay, we are diving into a story today that is just absolutely staggering. We're looking at a living lineage of people that stretches back tens of thousands of years, whose very existence is hanging in the balance today. But this isn't just a history lesson. It's a profound look into what we might call the architecture of survival. It's about how human intellect, completely intertwined with the natural world, crafted a perfectly sustainable existence, and what happens when that ancient equilibrium collides head-on with modern bureaucracy.
Now, I really want you to hold the sheer scale of this question in your mind as we go through this. Imagine a civilization that has totally mastered its environment. Not by dominating it, but through surgical precision, the deep intelligence of the hunter, and an unparalleled sensory connection to the forest. For millennia, they operated with absolute ecological mastery. And then, literally in the blink of an eye on an evolutionary scale, their entire way of life is rendered illegal. So, in this explainer, we'll trace this continuous lineage right up to the modern-day crisis. We'll hit the origins of the first Lankans, the forest dweller identity, the cost of modernization, the resistance of Tisahami, and finally, a culture on the brink.
Starting right off with Section 1, Origins of the First Lankans, unearthing Sri Lanka's prehistoric past. We really need to establish the immense historical weight here.
When you trace the timeline, it builds a picture of human settlement that predates almost everything we consider modern history. We're talking about origins around 38,000 BCE. To put that into perspective, by 30,000 BCE, these early societies were already engineering incredibly precise geometric stone tools. And around 10,000 years ago, genetic evidence suggests ancestors walked across an Ice Age land bridge from southern India, weaving into a really rich tapestry of human resilience.
So anthropologists actually draw a direct, continuous line from today's indigenous population right back to this specific Stone Age community, the Balangoda Man. These people didn't just survive in high-altitude environments, they possessed an incredibly sophisticated cognitive bridge to their natural world. And when we look at the archaeological record, you really see the legacy of the toolmaker. We are not talking about primitive rocks being banged together here. The geometric microliths and bone tools from this era are absolute masterpieces of engineering. Think about the sensory connection, the polished wood, the woven natural fibers, the exact weight of a stone implement in a hunter's hand. These tools were built for selective, sustainable harvesting, requiring a deep understanding of physics and precision. They even ran an advanced 80-kilometer trade network for salt. It was a highly intelligent, interconnected world.
Moving into Section 2. The forest dweller identity, more than just hunters. We transition now to the living descendants of those master toolmakers and how they define themselves today.
The names we use totally shape our understanding of a culture's identity. For centuries, colonial census takers and outsiders referred to them as Veddas, which is a reductive term that basically just means hunters. But their true name? The name they use for themselves is Wanniya Laeto, which translates to forest dwellers. They don't just hunt in the forest, they literally belong to it. And their culture is just beautifully complex. They have a matrilineal clan structure, meaning descent is traced through the mother. Through what we can call the silent pursuit in hunting and mastering the rhythms of water in fishing, they operated with profound ecological wisdom. They actively worship ancestral spirits, known as Ne Yaku, and their communication is fascinating too. While everyday language often blends with regional dialects now, they preserve a highly distinct ancient vocabulary called Verdar Basai, used exclusively to speak with their ancestors during sacred rituals. Which brings us to Section 3, the cost of modernization, when development totally clashes with tradition. As the 20th century rolled in, this perfectly constructed architecture of survival was severely disrupted. There is this massive ideological collision here between a cyclical, ancient worldview and modern state bureaucracy. To the Wanniya Laeto, land isn't real estate. They don't measure it in acres. The forest belongs to the ancestor spirits, and they are merely the custodians of it. But modern bureaucracy, it just sees acres to be parceled out for national parks or agricultural colonies. It's a fundamental disconnect in human values. And there was this cascading sequence of events that effectively criminalized their ancient way of life overnight. Starting in the late 70s, vast tracts of traditional lands were logged and inundated. Then, in 1983, the Madruru Oya National Park was created. And the supreme irony here is that the very people who had successfully protected this ecosystem for tens of thousands of years were suddenly declared trespassers. Their perfectly calibrated tools of survival were outlawed, and they were forcibly moved into rehabilitation villages to become rice cultivators.
The human cost behind these policies is absolutely devastating. There's this powerful quote from a translocated Wanniya Laeto leader. The government took away our hunting tools and gave us mamatis to dig our own graves. A mamati is a type of farming hoe. Think about that. When you strip a culture of the specific implements that serve as their cognitive bridge to the natural world, you aren't just giving them a new job. You are dismantling their entire intellectual and spiritual identity.
So part 4, the resistance of Tisahami, defending the ancestral homeland. Because as you might guess, not everyone accepted this forced assimilation quietly. 145,450. That is the staggering number of acres locked away behind the borders of the national park. It turned the ultimate custodians of the earth into criminals on their own ancestral lands, kept out by barriers and armed outposts. But Chief Uru Waragi Sisahami was a man of extraordinary conviction. While his people were being evacuated, he and his immediate family in the hamlet of Kotaba Kini flat out refused to leave. The government sent emissary after emissary, but the chief would not budge. He stood as a living testament to his people, remaining right there in the forest until he passed away in 1999 at the age of 96.
And neutral international observers factually documented the immense toll of this displacement. A 1992 study by the International Labor Organization laid it all out. The displaced Wanniya Laeto didn't just struggle because they lacked experience with modern monetary systems. They suffered from profound clinical depression. The loss of their forest freedom, the silencing of that silent pursuit of the hunt, it led to complete cultural demoralization. The administrative barriers placed in front of them were immense. In 1985, Wanniya Laeto delegates were actually invited to the United Nations in Geneva to testify about their human rights. But they never made it. The government denied them passports, officially citing that they were not real Sri Lankans. It was a deliberate, bureaucratic silencing of an ancient voice.
Finally, Section 5, a culture on the brink, the threat of erasure. This brings us to the incredibly precarious situation facing the Wanniya Laeto today.
Because time is genuinely running out. Back in 1990, the government actually approved the creation of an 1,800-acre sanctuary where they could legally pursue their traditions. But decades later, those promises remain largely unfulfilled. They continue to face harassment, language loss, and the steady encroachment of a modern world that just fails to understand the brilliance of their ancient knowledge.
So I want to leave you with this question to ponder. If we allow the total assimilation of the original custodians of the forest, what irreplaceable ecological wisdom do we all lose forever? The Wanniya Laeto are not just relics of the past. Their sophisticated architecture of survival is something our industrialized world desperately needs to learn from. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.